Today on Across the Fence, we'll dive into the gifts of a book. The second edition of the 2 Pillars of Recovery workbook was released earlier this year. This deceptively simple book on what people need to know and do for lasting sobriety from drugs or alcohol is a powerful tool for people struggling with addiction and also for their loved ones. Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us. I'm Fran Stoddard. And joining me today is author Dr. Geoff Kane, who serves as Chief of Addiction Services at the Brattleboro Retreat. Dr. Kane has spent 40+ years helping people understand and cope with substance use disorder. He's here with us today to share his practical wisdom about dealing with one of the most significant crises of our time. Welcome, Dr. Kane.
Thank you, Fran. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's great that you came in. So, you know, many people talk about the opiate crisis these days, but less airtime is devoted to what addiction actually is and realistic pathways to recovery. And you write so well in this book about that. It's very straightforward and incredibly helpful. So let's get right to it. What are the 2 pillars of recovery?
What I call the 2 pillars of recovery are 2 actions, keep your distance and ask for help, which tell people stuck in addiction what they need to do when they've had enough. And these are sort of the hard-earned principles that people with addiction have followed or don't follow and deal with the consequences. And over years of people with addiction sharing their stories with me, it seemed that they had these problems in common. They either didn't change their lifestyle enough to successfully have a lasting recovery, or they didn't connect enough with other people. So these are 2 ways that I try to make it unavoidable for people to understand what they need to do. And it combines the wisdom of people who have done it the hard way with what we know now from brain science, which conveys the same thing. People with addiction can't trust themselves, they can't trust their behavior, their own actions, so if they keep their distance, they can stay out of trouble. And
keeping their distance from whatever it is, substance.
Yes, all people, places, things, situations, rituals, trying to have a little instead of a lot. The brain at an instinctual level becomes so trained by the reward or escape from displeasure that comes with these dopamine releasing substances that people with addiction do things they don't decide to do, or they do things they've decided not to do.
Well, one thing that really struck me about your book is, I think you're talking about it now, you encourage people seeking recovery to work with, not against, the laws of nature. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Sure. It's Vermont, it's winter. Driving can be tricky, especially if people don't know what they're doing. I think people who grew up in this area smile a little bit when they see someone hitting the gas and spinning their tires, thinking they're going to get out of
somewhere.
Snow. There are skills that people use to get around safely, and they need to be aware of sort of physics and gravity and how to drive. And people who don't know what they're up against make mistakes and stay stuck. Addiction is the same way. The addictive substances used repeatedly, an addiction sometimes is defined as persistent use of those substances despite harm. Sort of, you're stuck, you can't get where you want to go, but you still hit the gas. So
interesting.
If people understand that their brain has been changed at an instinctual level, and that their conscious thoughts, their talent and good intentions doesn't matter much anymore as far as this addictive behavior is concerned. If they simply don't start it up. If a car is parked on a steep hill, the foot brake's out of commission, the parking brake is the only thing that's holding it there, well, don't release the parking brake.
Right. So that's this whole thing. So when one says, you can't just have one whatever at a special occasion, because that triggers all kinds of things. You can't have just one drink or just one pill, or once you're addicted.
Yes, and sort of the people whose stories taught me the importance of these two actions, keep your distance, ask for help,
Right.
Were people that I've started to say we're in the deep end of the pool of addiction. They may have had multiple treatments, multiple attempts at recovery, and they're still stuck, partly because they haven't changed their lifestyle enough to stay away from the substances, and they haven't connected with other people enough to have the personal growth and reinforcement of things. The human brain won't develop without another brain. We're here looking at each other. Think of infants and all the eye contact and nurturing that goes on. That helps the brain develop its structure and its function. And a lot of people didn't have as much nurturing as they might have. Probably none of us did, but some of us get enough so that we can function. But people who have had troubled childhoods, abuse, neglect, whatever, are more vulnerable to addiction, just like people who have a family history of addiction are more vulnerable. Vulnerable or not, if you practice, you can become addicted, even if you don't have those risk factors. But once addiction is there, I liken it to, if I hold my breath, at some point I'm going to take a breath. And nothing else matters. That's my brainstem and limbic system, the primitive brain, is going to take a breath. And I have nothing to say about it in my conscious self.
Right.
And that's where the drive to use addictive substances comes from in people who are in the deep end of the pool of addiction.
Right. So when they say, I've got the willpower, I can do this, it's
talent and good intentions.
That breath will happen.
Yeah, it's good to have those things, but that's usually not sufficient.
Right. So what holds people back from asking for help? Because clearly this is one of your two pillars.
I often in groups will ask the question, who here besides me has trouble asking for help? And usually all the hands in the room go up, even staff members. I credit shame, also pride, stubbornness, false pride perhaps. Shame is something that we all have. It's perhaps one of the most powerful emotions that we have. It comes from being treated with less respect than we deserve, and we all get a share of that. No one had perfect parents, teachers, preachers, friends, siblings. The experience of shame is feeling less than, rejectable. It has to do with stuff that gets programmed into our brain through those early relationships. The good news is that as long as we're alive, our brain can change for the better, so that if we are honest with people, talk about what's going on and our feelings and find out that they're similar to us, then we get more resilient, we get over the shame. The only way out of shame that I know of is through it. It's by talking about it.
Right.
And
that's where loved ones can come in too, that connection is so absolutely essential and important.
Yes, and loved ones come in for better and for worse.
Right.
If there's judgment and an edge to it, that's not necessarily going to help someone with addiction.
Right.
If they're accepted and understood, and sometimes people close to those with addiction scold them and tell them what they need to do. They're scolding themselves so much for that person to say, it's hard for you right now.
Right. So to get through, they really need support, not scolding.
Acceptance, also accountability.
Right.
So setting expectations and holding people accountable to that also helps people to recover.
Right. So in rural Vermont, resources for treatment for addiction are pretty good in this state in a way, but frequently it's not anywhere close to where somebody lives. Can this workbook be all that somebody might need?
That would be nice. Yeah. I don't think
you wish.
I don't think that's necessarily sufficient.
But it's really helpful.
I emphasize the basics. I sometimes call them the bare essentials of addiction recovery. Right. People who don't make some lifestyle changes, who don't get more honest and connected with the people, who don't keep the distance and ask for help, if they're in the deep end of the pool of addiction, don't do so well.
Right.
But they may also need additional help. Some people who don't have a home may need a place to live.
Right.
Some people whose home puts them too close to addictive substances may need to get out of that home for a while and go to a rehab.
Right. Or they might need medication.
And they might need medication. To keep your distance and ask for help takes a certain amount of oomph, and some people just don't have the traction to do that. Right. I liken medications to putting cleats on your shoes if you're going to walk across a frozen surface,
right, like
in street
buprenorphine and some of these.
Buprenorphine and methadone are very useful for people addicted to opioids. Naltrexone also. Naltrexone is also a medication for addiction to alcohol. We have a camprosate and disulfiram also for addiction to alcohol. And fortunately in Vermont, there has been an emphasis on making particularly buprenorphine and methadone more available to people with addiction to opioids.
So recovery is really tough. It's a very long road. It takes courage, conviction, and this help you're talking about. But I've also, often there are many relapses over a many years. How do you deal with that?
Persistence, hope. We all need positive expectations, and we're more likely to live up to those. Coaches who believe they're going to win the game often have players who win the game.
Right.
And it's tricky because these problems do endure.
Right. You know, we're going to have to tell people how to get your book, Dr. Kane.
One problem is that when people say that relapse is part of the disease, it can set them up for failure, right, because they don't understand that people in recovery have, some make no treatments, some make 100 treatments. It's never too late. Okay,
get the two pillars from your website, geoffkane.com/workbook. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope you have set some people on the road to recovery.
Thank you, Fran.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us Across the Fence. I'm Fran Stoddard.